Good evening and welcome to the fifth in our series of lectures on the Negro in America. Tonight we will deal with the topic, the Negro and the University, the prejudices, the discriminations, etc. that the Negro faces on campus, and perhaps even after his campus life is done, as far as employment and things of this nature are concerned. I might announce first of all that we have a little bit of a discrepancy in tonight's program, as our format is usually one of the featured speaker, the guest speaker, a film, and then the forum. Tonight, however, I'm sorry to say that our film did not come in. This was a CBS documentary from New York, and by gosh, I bet in tomorrow morning's mail it will be there. But it didn't come in today. So the format of this forum will deviate a little from that which you have been accustomed to, in that we will have our featured speaker, our guest speaker, and the meat of our program again, the forum. And we hope to let you go a little earlier tonight, perhaps around 8:30, depending on how things go for us. I'm sure that'll be to your likelihood. May I remind you one more time, and this will probably be the last time that we will be selling our record here, Adventures in Negro History, at cost again, courtesy of the Pepsi-Cola Company, 89 cents. We have a young lady at a table back there who will be very happy to assist you in this endeavor. To proceed with the program then, may I introduce Dr. Everett Farrell, Chairman of the Department of History at Ball State, who again will take care of the major introductions tonight. Dr. Farrell.
May I welcome you tonight to the fifth session of the 31st Annual LaFollette Film Forum Series. Due to the fact that the film didn't arrive, it seemed as if this might be an opportunity to share with you a little bit of research that I did rather recently. Recently, I was looking over some of the past programs and doing a little thinking about the spirit, and I think some of the basic principles upon which this program has been based, as well as some of the articles of faith. I'd like to suggest some of them. Many of these quotations have been used either in part or in toto as titles of these film forums. I'd like to share some of them because I think in doing this that will indicate some of the things that we have been doing here this summer and following along in the tradition. Most of these I'm sure you have already heard. I'm sure you know the one that I disagree with everything you say, yet I shall defend until the death your right to say it. It is, another statement has been, we don't care what you think, just so you think. It has been stated that 2% think they think, or 2% think, 10% think they think, and 90% would rather die than think. I'm sure that this doesn't apply to this audience this evening. It has been stated, too, that thinking is a little bit like sin, that those of us who don't are sort of scared to, and those of us who do sort of enjoy it. So let's hope you enjoy let's hope that you enjoy not sin, but thinking with us in this particular program. Another one of the statements, and this was the title of one of the programs, earn the right to an opinion. Another one, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. And I think that, certainly as an article of faith, that we believe that intelligent men and women of goodwill can still reason together and find solutions to common problems in the year of our Lord, 1968. Thought might share some of the things and some of the titles and part of the titles that have come down in the past 31 years. Now it is my distinct privilege to present to you one of the speakers of the evening. I'm sure most of you already know Dr. Gordon. He is a widely quoted man on the campus. He received his B.S. from Pomona College and his master's and his Ph.D. from a neighboring state institution, Purdue University. He has published, I suspect that some of you, maybe many of you know, and I know those of us who read it thoroughly enjoyed this book, Community and Stress. It's the story of Middletown, Muncie, Indiana. I've had the privilege of serving on a great number of panels, student panels of one variety or another with Professor Gordon. I've always found him exciting and stimulating. I think we started a series of programs a couple of years ago, and if we hadn't grown a bit tired of it, I think we'd still be giving that show wit. I happen to be just the discussion or the panel leader, and the others put on the show, and it was a very well received by the student body. Some of you may have been freshmen the year that we were doing this. He's known as an excellent teacher, the man who makes you think, raises significant questions, and of course is known for the interesting type of examinations that he gives to students. Again, trying to make you think. It's a real pleasure to present to you Professor Whitney Gordon.
Thank you. Dr. Farrell, of course, is extraordinarily kind. The blue books will be handed out during the break, and we'll go from there. Look, originally I had hoped to speak more or less off the cuff. As I thought about it, I thought the nature of my remarks had at points some complexities. So I did the terrible thing that academians sometimes do. I put it down on paper, and I shall more or less read it to you. I do not like that procedure, but I think it's wise in this case. Later during the discussion, the fur can fly in 20 directions, and we will resort to a more informal procedure. So if you'll bear with me, I will more or less read my remarks. What I'm concerned about is, of course, racism, what I call the arrogance of whiteness, counter-racism, and, of course, the university. And I start a little bit technically, but then I will try to illustrate. I think at a time of, very rapid shifts in attitudes and values, trusty old vocabularies begin to sway, they begin to wobble, and they slide around in regard to the meanings they are meant to convey. And I think if there is marked tension in the society, there tends to be an escalation in the use of rather electrically charged words. I think such is clearly the case in the university in 1968. For instance, one hears much of racism as practiced by well-meaning, if dreadfully stolid, white authorities. Now, I find the term racism a bit strong when applied to academic bureaucrats and bureaucratized academes. On the other hand, the traditional term of paternalism, I do not think does justice to the daily injustices we practice by way of habit of mind and by insensitive tradition. Now let me try to clarify my point. I would ask, by what right do I, who am really so thankfully middle class, so very white, middle-aged, not so thankfully, suburban, a professor, by what right do I speak of what it is like to be a working-class black student age 21 at Ball State University? Indeed, one can argue that one of the very points of being an intellectual is to acquire and to exhibit the capacity for vicarious understandings of the ways of others. But I do not think it is all really that clean and that simple or that noble. I find it hard to believe that among the black students at this university that there are not several who could not say anything I say and say it with an edge of psychological exactitude much greater than mine. No, I smell the gentle stench of the arrogance of whiteness somewhere in all this. We are so presumptuous as whites. Let me turn to another level of the same argument. Within the dominant middle-class white society, I note that it is we who insist that the tone and the style of a dialogue with our fellow human beings must be couched in our terms. That involves being polite, modulated, semi-frank, but never ominous or threatening. Now, as one committed to the meaningful life of the mind, I believe that our style has much to commend in itself. I intend to carry on in that manner, sprinkling it with just enough pepper to give it tang. But the matter doesn't really end there. And again, I do not think we are quite so clean as we like to imagine. As making it whites, we have devised, I suspect, a superb series of ego defenses, and we have so structured the style of dialogue that we need never confront the bruising reality or the emotional misery of others less genteel than we. There will be little, very little, of the nakedly nitty-gritty in our air-conditioned world of words. We are saying to the poor, and to the poor black particularly, that they must spar our way, or we shall not deign to spar at all. I think we are afraid of tough talk, because maybe we sense how little bravery we have left on tap after years and years of living behind our clean suburban barricaded fences and hedges. I suspect that we subtly forbid the expression of outrage in the absolutely livid tones and colors of rage itself, because we are so desirous of keeping our little and very hypersensitive adrenal glands from squirting, and thereby making us terribly tense, terribly shaky, and perspiring. You know, we have it all so very neat, so very well wrapped up. Now, in my mind, there is nothing inherently wrong in that, in our way, if it is how we want to behave, to be, in effect, middle-class sphinx in our dialogue. But just what manner of arrogance of whiteness is it that we refuse to meet others in any other stylistic terms but our own? You know, we used to call our standards uplift when we applied them to others, and now we call it, playing upon sociological and anthropological jargon, acculturation. The patronizing of others is no less dubious for its more esoteric vocabulary. Let me give you just one more and perhaps a little more elusive case at hand in the university community. I suggest that the very premises, notice, I'm suggesting that the very premises of our dialogues with Negroes are tinctured by our insistence that the essence of the discourse be that which we find ideologically acceptable. I know I must clarify what I have in mind. Here is an example. Whether we like it or not, and I do not like it, the word among many black students today is separatism. To me, by the way, this smacks of more than a little that is unfortunate. But that is not the point. The point is that the word among many of our Negro students is separatism. And you know, in our peculiar arrogance of mind, we refuse to meet them on that ideological turf. We insist somehow that they meet in our, what should I call it, spirit of 1963, to which we ourselves came so ruinously late in the day. Who are we really? Now really, who are we to define the ideological turf and to rule out any other turf? And I think, therefore, because we do not start where they are now, talking to us they find rather pointless. Concurrently, we sit in our committees and over our coffee, and we are frankly irrelevant. Twice in recent weeks, I have heard liberal, and I underscore liberal because I'm a liberal, I have heard liberal colleagues make impassioned defenses of tokenism in the fraternities and sororities. To me, such a defense, and in reference to such abysmal organizations, is really wretched. Now, okay, patience. No. I believe this will elicit some comment later from some members of these organizations, which is very good. You know, let's kick things around. No stomping on people, otherwise let's have a good go. Look, my point is, though, it is not how wretched are the Greek letter organizations or tokenism, but how irrelevant the discussion is. It's totally irrelevant to many black students, perhaps the vast majority of black students on this campus at this time. You know, the black students have, as so often with the underdog, wonderfully succinct summaries for elaborate situations. They say, man, they're out of it. And we're the professors. I suspect that for many white Americans, the very first time we ever encountered Negroes on black terms was in the course of that first Xerox-sponsored TV program of Black America chaired by Mr. Cosby. That, to me, epical program shook more than a few of us. Now, why? Was it that, as I suspect, that at least in part, down below the film clips which hurt, down below the boot camp-like indoctrination of little children which was upsetting, and so forth and so on, was it that perhaps we were denied for just 60 minutes our white ideological turf? And so, as academes, we go on, almost blindly, and usually blandly, I notice, walking along on the side of the angels, to be sure, but terribly naive, often irrelevant, and I think always toting with us the unseen balloon of our own arrogance of whiteness. I think we must do better than that. Now, there is, however, another side to this whole discussion, and there again I think we have to look. The other morning at breakfast, Mrs. Gordon, who had the very painful fate of growing up in Mr. Hitler's Germany, remarked rather tartly on the basis of some silliness that I had just said, I find racism in black skins no different from racism in black shirts. She was, of course, completely sound. Completely sound. Even if we as whites, we didn't get to this, we were almost late for lecture, both of us, but I thought there was a partial rebuttal of sorts, though breakfast rebuttals to your wife when she's come on strong may not be the wisest of diplomacy, as some of you know. But I'd been silly, I'd asked for it. But look, I completely support her position. One can be very lopsided in how he views racism. He can play games. What is fit for the goose should be fit for the gander, and we don't always do that. But I am struck that even while this is true, I think we as whites jump awfully high and awfully fast and squeal awfully loud when we realize that black militancy really means black racism some of the time. Whereas the ongoing and absolutely massive white racism in the form of tenacious school segregation in North and South, and several bigoted presidential candidates, you can take your choice, this elicits little more than distress among our right-thinking friends and neighbors in Dick and Jane and Spot. But if we are living with on-campus white racism in the form of our multiply retrograde Greek letter organizations and the hanky-panky that drags on in off-campus housing, to say nothing of the general racial rot in this city, despite some efforts to the contrary, surely then we must also note, equally bluntly, the quasi-racist grounds of black separatism and black militancy, and do not call them for anything but what they are. I think we applaud group solidarity and race pride, for we recognize the psychic benefits to maimed black self-concepts. If you have any doubt about this, again, think back of Mr. Cosby's program and the draw a person test, the DAP, and the pictures that the little Negro children drew as opposed to what the white children drew. That was a sickening and shocking encounter and tells you what racism has done to people in this country. And it's done it habitually, regularly for 300 years, and it plans to go on doing it, I suspect. All right. I recognize, therefore, a certain validity in race pride and so forth and so on. But I also must note, as a practicing sociologist, and I must underscore the finding that any marked rise in in-group solidarity, however desirable it may be, is highly correlated with increasing out-group hostility. You don't get it both ways, you see, even if you're under the lights. In other words, one had better keep such matters very much in the front of his mind when he contemplates such things as a university such as Northwestern granting black students a dormitory of their own. By the way, I find that rather a great folly on several grounds, though I can appreciate the argument. In short, one had simply better not pretend that race pride and racism don't overlap. They are overlapping phenomenon. And so perhaps at points one can speak of the arrogance of blackness. I think it is a dilemma we have to face, even while we note and even while we shudder at what has been done to the inner being of Negro children after 300 years of steady racism. Well, I know I've spoken rather darkly, even with the light. And in conclusion, I regret that I have no answers. I'm only presenting the oppressive contours of our days. Of course, the secret of even the most dour of academes is that by insisting that we look deeply at ourselves, we can begin to transform our social existence and our own beings into something worthy of our most achingly lovely dreams. And I have, I think, simply tried to make a beginning in looking at words. And that's all we have done. Well, I thank you. I turn it over to Dean Byron.